morning.
Say it in my best Texas. Howdy, partner.
Hi, partner. It's pretty cold here in the Pacific Northwest and in Texas. In fact, it's colder in Dallas than it is here right now.
A bit much.
What's it like in London right now? Are you guys having any kind of bad weather?
Uh, Today it was below freezing.
Okay.
Yeah, so today was -3 to 3, and then tomorrow -3 to 3, and then Wednesday -2 to 3. But next week, starting Sunday, it'll be 8 to 11 and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you're on Celsius, so that's not as bad as it sounds. It was 12 degrees yesterday here, Fahrenheit, which would be, what is that?
That sounds pretty cold.
Yeah, it's very cold. It's way below zero in Celsius. But today it's going to be about 25, 26, and I'll go for a walk. The sun is shining. It's not snowing today, thank God. I'm going to say this, if I were sitting in Park Cities getting ready to go skiing, I'd be happy. But sitting here in Vancouver when I'm trapped in and there's nothing, I can't even really go outside. I hate snow. I only like
Well,
snow when I'm at a ski place.
that's yeah, that's not quite as nice. Hang on. Right, I just had to write a sentence
Hi,
there.
Rob, good morning.
Morning, Deanie.
Hello.
Hey, Rob, good to see you. Very good. Oh, have you had a haircut?
Yeah. Oh, I have to switch my camera.
You look like a fine, upstanding young man.
Yeah, that was.
Oh, yes. I
You
can
look,
still
my
see it up.
father would say, a scholar, a gentleman and a scholar.
So, Rob, I'm very, very excited to come out. I sent Deanie's people what I think are the final flight things today. Hope for
Okay.
confirmation soon. So here's the other thing. Bruce Horn has managed to get me access to the party, it looks like. You are going to be there, right?
I don't know. I'm on the waiting list.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
call Harvey back and see if he can get me in.
How
Yeah.
many people are they allowing into this thing? Do you know, Rob?
No idea.
No, it's very oversubscribed. That's one thing we know. Yeah, because the thing is, Rob, if Brendel also does not have a ticket, so if Harvey's all, oh yeah, I organized that, and for you and me, then it would be great if you can give the ticket to Brendel, because surprisingly, Bruce Horn came through. But if you know, nothing to ask him about, but just in case, it'd be fun if Brendel could join us.
I'll see what I can do. This call.
So, guys, today, I know we're only 1 minute in and we're waiting for people, but what I thought we would do is spend the first 30 minutes going through a few assumptions so that we don't go all over the place. But just 30 minutes. After that, we're in a normal future of text. What do you think? Is that a reasonable use of our time?
Well, what is the assumptions going to be about? What are we talking about in assumptions?
Top level, I'll show you actually. I have a document for it to go through. So yeah, this is what I think are things we've agreed to. And I don't think we should agree with every detail today. That is not what I mean. But like you and Adam and me talked about on Friday, there's a few things here I just want nailed down before we go to the higher level.
You're talking about guiding principles for our development.
A little bit of guiding principles, but more, these are a few things that we just know we're going to have to make. So, hi Ken, hi Mark.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Morning, Adam.
So there is actually, but before we properly start, something else I thought was so cool. I wanted to share with you guys for literally the first few minutes before we are up. Hi, Andrew.
Morning, Andrew.
So yeah, just wanted, this is, yeah, I got to share this real quick. So as many of you know, in Reader, of course, we have built in Ask AI, ChatGPT, right? So now Apple has decided they probably want to highlight my software on the App Store. coming up, so that's nice. So that means, oh darn, I have to be very focused on making sure it looks pretty. So I would like to have Ask AI / ChatGPT and Author, of course, as well. I've decided that's too expensive right now. So what we're going to do, I have a tool called Liquid that some of you know that
Mhm.
can take any text and quickly run through an operation. So I'm showing you this, believe it or not, for an XR reason, but this is what's quite interesting. So the idea is you do a keyboard shortcut. Of course, you can do control click, but this is faster. And then you get the Ask AI. I'm currently going through the prompts. And then we can do things like this one here. Does this look right? I don't want to build stuff to get a student to have things written for them, but I would like to have things that could actually help them with their reading and their writing, right? So that's kind of cool. So then we get to other things that I just, this blows my mind, right? So this is the, if you don't do keyboard, check this out. Turn this into code. In some cases, it actually works. This is just a normal paragraph, but it tries.
What kind of code?
Here
HTML?
here it's using Python, right? And it's obviously a bit stupid because it doesn't make any sense, but we've tried it on other things. In fact, a month or two ago, a discussion in the community, I asked Leon if he could help me write something so that I can give it to my developers. And just for fun, I read it through this and it did the work. But here's the final thing I wanted to show you guys and then tell you why. So I take this actual code of this stuff itself that is in Xcode. We have this little bit, and I do this, and then I run this. Check this code, please. There are no syntax errors in the code. However, you can do this, that, and the other. Obviously, you guys are more advanced when it comes to AI than me, but the reason I'm starting the call with it today is if we manage to have text selection relatively soon in XR, because that's a huge issue, and we have talked about voice commands, it's going to be really fun to use these things in the space. Well, just 10-second summary for Brandel and Leon. I was just doing some ChatGPT Ask AI things on text, including on code, and it runs really well, of course. Oh, Leon's looking very cool. And the only reason was to highlight to you guys that it'll be amazing when we can integrate that into our XR environment. Now, we're all here quickly, which is really, really cool. I would like to spend, I was going to say 30 minutes, but let's say just 10, 15 minutes going through a few assumptions of what to make. And I'm very glad you're here, Ken, because you have the right kind of experience. So I'm going to show you a document with some stuff I have written. And if anything is up for discussion, I put a question mark next to it. This is not for us to go through everything. That is something that Alan has organized much, much better for us. This is just to see what are the things we have assumed that we actually agree on, and don't go in circle on those things. I'll try to make the text a bit bigger. Can you all see this?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Let's look at this first paragraph here. And again, it should be obvious. If it isn't, it's really good to know at this early stage if we disagree. The academic we aim to support is someone connected to the Hypertext Conference. This is our initial user base. This means professor and graduate student in computer science and in the humanities / electronic literature. We aim to support 2 stages of work, reading a document in XR in extended ways and analyzing their own library of academic PDF documents. Basic requirements is that the end user needs to be access their own documents as hosted on their local machine in XR space. There will be a lot to discuss and there will be a lot to experiment around, but we do have a few goals as listed below. So let's just read through them and see if anything are obvious. Connection. Connection, I mean getting stuff from the traditional computer to the headset. Allow the end user to open a web page for quick and easy access to their documents in the headset, where the user specifies a local folder and receives a link to use on their headset. Adam and Andrew, this is the kind of thing you are doing, right? I'm getting a Dini nod. That's good enough for me.
Mm.
Support the upload of plain PDF and PDF with extra metadata later. Support of upload of library data, which can include stuff that is in documents such as highlights or comments, probably JSON. Support later of downloaded library data and support of download of documents from the headset to the local computer. That's quite far in the future because we're not going to be making any documents on the headset for a while, right?
Yeah, and I'll mention to everybody, Adam, Rhoda, Andrew and I met on Friday and came up with two quick phases that we're working on in this first part of our project. And we'll be posting that later on for you to make it available. And we also kind of envisioned how we're going to be moving forward in the next phases. So we did get that done on Friday. And one more thing is that we have now, Frodo and I have worked out his itinerary for coming to town. So now we have some planning done when we have this document to help kind of guide us.
Yeah, exactly. So the stuff up here, there's nothing that someone is screaming at me because I can't hear or see you all saying that is entirely not what we're doing. This is obvious, right?
Mhm.
Just one aspect of confusion. If this is all essentially local, what does the upload and download actually mean?
Between your desktop and your headset.
Okay.
And the question of local is a very good question, Mark, because I believe, Adam and Andrew, that it will be architected so local has no meaning. If you have the access, you can be somewhere else. And this means that later on, the same architecture will support multiple people in the same environment, right? Okay, I can see Adam, not Andrew, with my few heads here. So thanks for that nod. That's cool. Right, so then we get into reading. Initially just one document page by page, and that in itself is quite a bit of opportunity for scaling, sizing, moving, and all of that stuff. And then I just added select text for operations because the little biddy with the ChatGPT that I did earlier, there's a lot of stuff you can do if you can select. If you can't select, there's a lot of stuff you can't do. Then we have talking about 2-page views and more. Custom views and grids, etc. This is really getting into our research phase, and then going on to multiple documents in the same space. And can you guys see this text easily?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's probably annoying if I read over everything. So this is just different layers of interactions.
Actually, no, it's good. It's good to read it. It's good for us to
Yeah.
hear you read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we have interactions with document contents for richer views. Ideally, specifically, if we have metadata, visual meta or other types of metadata. Interactions from document to library. For instance, oh, I come across a citation. Do I have the source? That kind of stuff. Interactions from document to document beyond library. Oh, this is cited, but nothing I have. How can we represent a book that's elsewhere in the universe? Interactions to add annotations to documents. This is highlights or comments. Writing in the margin and highlight. Obviously crucial for a certain point. And then we
Hey,
have,
Fro,
yes.
Can I just ask?
Absolutely.
These, as the title says, these are user stories, and they are great building blocks. I like how you're breaking it down. These are not requirements, though, right?
What I'm doing here is reducing my personal stress level.
Yeah.
It's a run through to make sure that there isn't something here that I'm wildly misunderstood to you guys. Because once I've gone through this list in a few minutes, I'll stop sharing. We can do the normal stuff, and then what you are doing with the proper user stories modeled on this very clever book will happen.
Yeah, but this is fantastic to break it down into the main chunks. That's the kind of thing that we would then open up, prioritize, move around, increase our understanding of, yeah. And then, but the reading part I don't see as being like the same as the previous section, where the previous section was closer to like requirements, like this is what's needed in order to get the ball rolling. And now we're into reading, which is like, here are all the things that we at an early stage want to get to, but we need to like understand it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And let me get through the next two
Sure.
sections.
Can I
Well,
add one more thing to that, Frodo? It seems like some of these activities in reading are more writing. Are you saying that these are preparatory elements we're putting into our work to prepare for the writing part in the next year?
I'm saying that in the discussions that Alan will lead us through, this is a reality check for that. I'm not saying all of this should be built now, not at all. It's roughly prioritized top to bottom in each category. So, initially reading a document. And here on the bottom, for example, I've highlighted interactions to add notes. It's a small item here, but it's absolutely massive because that moves us into thinking with index cards in XR space where we just happen to have PDFs. So that's a huge discussion right there. So it is really like, hang on, that's not the kind of thing we're doing. That's the kind of thing I would like to hear now, if there is such a thing. Because the last two things are maybe a little bit more pertinent. The first one is to view the library as a basic list to open a known document to support reading. This is something we have to do immediately. If you have something on your computer, you want to read it in XR, this is the basic thing we have to design. And this one below is, it would be really useful if this list can indicate the last read document. Because if you're reading something on your computer and you want to put your headset on, the last read document you may want to open immediately. You're not interested in the library at all. And then finally, with analyzing library, and this will be a huge research topic for us, I think, view the library as a map or a graph to analyze things in the library. So then at the very end, this is something that I hope to discuss through Alan a lot. Now that we've kind of agreed roughly with the stuff that has to happen, why would people do what? And I'm not meaning, Alan, in any way to have this as anything more than an indication of what is to come, because there is a very big difference, of course, between somebody coming in to explore a new field, to do basically literature review, someone seeing how things connect to get a clue, so to speak, to finding a specific thing, or someone writing a paper to find a citation. So I look forward to the discussions that you're going to be running, Alan, to help us understand which ones of these we really want to augment and enable first. Peter.
Yes, do we see all this happening inside of a web browser, or are we envisioning a standalone client application that would have web technology running under the hood, but would look something like Author?
This will all be happening in WebXR, so it will be accessed through a URL. So ideally, it should run very, very similar on whatever XR platform people are using. We're not going to be rolling an app, excuse me, for any app store, at least at this point. Any huge comments on this? Like what?
Yeah. So first is that when you start doing things like text selection versus reading, that has a big difference in the architectural choices you need to make, because like we've kind of said, WebXR doesn't support PDF, but we can load images of the pages of a PDF. But images of a page of PDF obviously don't have the concept that they actually consist of text. Doesn't make it impossible, but it means that in order to facilitate the use of that, we will need to do something more fine-grained with it. And so that's where I think like Tricotext would be able to work. You mentioned, you said you want to say something about that, Andrew?
Yeah, like you're hitting it right on. But I have noticed when I've been tinkering, trying to figure out how much info we can get out of PDFs, and Adam might have better insight here than me. But I was able to extract text from the actual PDF inside of Three.js, but it's not formatted like you would expect. It's formatted visually, not contextually. So sometimes in
Yeah.
certain documents, you can get an entire line, or not a sentence, just a line, and that's all one selection. You can't really break that down very easily. On the other hand, some documents have just like single letters. So it's a
They sure
bit
do.
varied.
Oh,
There's
okay.
there's a new AI open source thing. I may have linked to it in Slack, but I can dig it up again. That is promising to do what IBM Watson surrendered to 5 years ago, which is the ability to read multiple columns in a PDF and just essentially scrape the text as it's supposed to be written or read rather. So I'm sure it's early stages, but it might be a thing to look at, pass through and see if that's an easier way to extract text.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I see.
But go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear. We do not have to support all PDFs equally. We need to decide on what the oldest type of PDF should be. I propose it is modern text PDFs from ACM Digital Library that are at least consistent to their style formatted. Otherwise, we're going into quite literally hell.
Hey, Ken has got his hand up.
Yeah,
And
Ken, ready for
So
you.
I spend a lot of time in this in mixed reality, and I'm constantly hacking on it. What I can tell you in WebXR. So what I can tell you right now from my perspective is if you came to me and you said, I want to implement this, then from the perspective of rendering, just looking at what these things want to do, I would split the problem into two parts. One part is everything where I want to be inherently in 3D 6 degrees of freedom. I'm in a room, I've got virtual objects around me, and basically I'm organizing, searching, rearranging, doing all the things that are really, really good in a 3D world. And then there is I'm reading, or I'm doing things that are about reading, like maybe annotating, but really it's about reading. And from the perspective of someone who develops for WebXR on the MetaQuest 3, there are basically two different worlds. There's the world of all of the 3D objects you can make, including textured objects with lighting and movement and physics and whatever it is you want to do. And then they have this thing called layers. And the reason they have layers is because people need instructions. And when you go and you put something as a layer, you prepare something as a 2D image with very, very as high quality resolution as you want. And it bypasses all the 3D stuff and it becomes something right in front of you that's absolutely gorgeous and crisp and anti-aliasing and fonts and all that stuff. So if you're reading a page, I would say forego all the 3D on your host computer that's talking all the time, one way or another, to your headset, prepare an image, send it over as a texture, use it as layers, and read the text and interact directly with that. But then when you want to find something, now you, of course, have all of the power of wandering around in your room and and things show up and move around. So instead of trying to be a compromise, that's the way I would do it with today's technology. There may be future technology that has different things, but that's what they're giving us right now to play with.
Excellent.
This is really good to hear, Ken, and I look forward to Brandel commenting further on this. I'm sure you're itching, Brandel. We can still do that in the same code. We just change modes, so to speak, right? So if we have like a 3D library and we pull a PDF, do things, if we do a certain action, like it move it certain distance towards us, it could switch into this other mode, for example, right?
Who you
Yeah.
ask?
So
And I was just wondering if Ken had another comment on that, and then over to you, Brandel. Sorry, just
No, I mean, sure. I mean, you could do. I mean, obviously, certainly from a user experience HCI perspective, you can make all those choices about what prompts somebody to go from browsing mode to reading mode. I was speaking to once you make those choices, here's what your best options are for the actual rendering in your headset.
Thank you very, very much, Brandel.
Yeah, so the WebXR Layers API is, well, it's not supported on Vision Pro at the moment, but I'm talking to folks to make sure that we see it as the right, because the only thing that's supported on right now is the Meta platform. It's actually not fully ratified in the standard, but it's a way of being able to, yeah, bypass the sort of the WebXR runtime having to do all of the positioning and saying, there's something here, some more powerful, more efficient system is responsible for rendering it, and just go with that. It's here and it goes on later. And so it should be a good way of being able to achieve a higher resolution and potentially a higher fidelity refresh rate for video content and other things like that. But yeah, like it doesn't work anywhere but Meta right now, which is the only place that matters so far for most people. But yeah, having sort of hooks to be able to support it as well as to drop out of it would be useful until we get our act together and get working on it, because it would be really nice to be able to get to full resolution. It's just a way to, yeah, to, like I said, to hint, this is a simple thing that we know you want to render in this way, so you don't have more complex ways of rendering, like you can't build complex geometries, you can only build planar or cylindrical or other things like that. And then that defers the responsibility to a lower level renderer that hopefully has better system resources to reach for it. Oh yeah, the other thing that I wanted to say though, alongside this stuff is that you know, you've got some stuff about uploading and sending and things like that. It would be really wonderful to be as I think as chatty as possible about all of the things that are happening in the session, so that they can be, one, multicast to all of the other clients in the future, but it's not necessary to do that out of the gate. But two, to be able to actually get a full, richer context of what a person is doing in the space and understanding about their relationship with the document. So you mentioned sort of getting the most recently used, and that's very handy. But thinking much more greedily about all of the data points about where somebody maybe moved their head, all of those kinds of things that are sort of part of a creepy surveillance capitalism future, but when they're turned backward in on themselves and they're surveillance rather than surveillance, they can be incredibly powerful signals for people to be able to develop sort of attentional models or relationships that are richer around what people understand of the things that they're navigating and what kind of signals you can leverage to kind of manipulate their views for them.
Thank you. I see Ken still has his hand up. Are you anything further or?
Was a mistake. There you go. All right. Sorry.
Don't worry. Dini, you took your hand up and down. Were you swatting a fly?
Well, I was going to speak, but you said Alan was before me, so I put it down.
No, the other way around. That's why I say Dini, then you. Because Alan took his hand up, so I meant Dini and then Alan,
Okay.
sorry.
My question, this is to Ken. As an academic, since this is meant for academics, when I don't know how other academics read, and maybe Mark can jump in here, but when I read a text, I don't read a text and then come back and mark it. I annotate as I go, right? And I'm marginalia. There's not, one book in that cabinet that's not full of me marking. I don't read and then think. And I'm responding, like, for example, the book that you sent me, Froda, he makes some wild claims in it, and I'm just like screaming back at him. The Gutenberg Elegies book, when I had that, I marked it up like crazy, threw it across the room about 3 or 4 times. My relationship with text is very visceral, is what I'm trying to tell you. So I can't imagine bringing up text in a VR environment, looking at it, and then saying, now I'm going to do something with it. To me, they're integrated. So it's, if I'm not tracking you properly, please correct me, but it seems like what you're suggesting is we start off with the 2D that we can read, that's pretty, and then we can move into this structural restructuring in 3D where I can actually manipulate and do things to it. Am I correct? Is that correct?
I think if you're talking to me, I was speaking on a low technical
Okay.
level. So if you're talking to me, is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, yeah, no, it's okay. Zoom, it's like, I'm looking at everybody. So, I was speaking on a technical level of what for graphics rendering gives you your best bang for your buck. So for example, right now, if I were doing this in WebXR and I wanted to privilege very high resolution, crisp, anti-aliased, gorgeous text and figures and all that kind of stuff, and someone is just focusing on a document, which they could be annotating, I would generate the images on my MacBook, and I would keep uploading an updated version of that to the layers. The moment I'm not reading, but I'm organizing and I'm moving the books on my shelf and I'm searching for things, I would not be using the layers. I'd be using the full power of 3D. What you would lose then is you don't get the absolutely crisp, beautiful, high quality anti-alias fonts, but you get everything else. So
Yeah, I think
I
what you're
think of
talking-
annotating as I'm in the document in a reading mode, but I'm also modifying that 2D thing.
I think it's interesting what you're saying because this correlates to how some print books are. Like if you look at the quality of print of a paperback, the paper's not very fine. The ink is a little bit smudgy on the page. And you look at something that's published by a high, like an MIT Press, much crisper. In the end, what matters is the information inside that text and what I can do with it. So I don't
Although
privilege.
I will say that having spent many, many hours in the Quest 3, the best text you could ever possibly get using a 3D texture map is nothing like what you get easily with the layers. They're
Yeah.
completely different universe. I mean, nobody wants to read a paperback where they made a mistake printing it and the fonts are all blurry because it just gives
Yeah.
you a
I'm just saying we're talking about use cases for academics. So
Sure.
how do academics interact with text?
Can I,
And I
can I
think-
jump? for
yeah,
this?
sorry. Okay.
No, this is all excellent, and Ken, that is incredible material, and in fact, this is a little bit what came up last week on Wednesday. Is this exact kind of scenario? We're actually talking. The way I've sort of tried to break it down is that there are several different projects that seem like they all have the same name, but they're actually different. And so, Kim, what you're talking about, I would put into like the material bucket, right? Like learning the capabilities of the device and getting to know that material, right? Because you can't make a skyscraper out of wood, or you can, but right, it's going to be, yeah. And then on the other side, we have a different project, which is, Deanie, what you're talking about, which is really understanding, in that case, and in the case of the specific project, here are the academics that we're targeting, but there's also a broader sense of people who read in very, even academics who read in different ways, and we want to understand that. And then this is probably obvious to everyone here, but the goal is to find, okay, let's say we find out that it's actually impossible for academics to read in VR the way that they like to read. Well, we still have a whole lot of options in front of us of what can be done in mixed reality that is the best fit, right? And that's how we start to refine our scope and sort of pivot and work towards that. While and this is where having the user stories for that you mentioned are that's great, and we might find 6 months, 3 months, whatever, that okay, half of these are no longer really relevant because we've decided that the sweet spot that we can focus on, that we get a bang for the buck, is going to be this area, so we're going to cut out that other stuff, right? The point is, or the assumption is, if we can delineate what intentional stance we have when we're talking about some of these things, then we'll avoid any kind of confusion, right? Because we need to know the material, the capabilities of the devices, and the range of opinions around it. Like Brando was saying, the things that we can easily decide on that are yes or no, and then the other things that are kind of like, well, we don't know, right? That's all the stuff we want to understand. And then Yeah, I'm just restating what I said before. Okay, I'll get back into that in a little bit.
Yeah, I'll hand it over to Fabienne, of course, and then Peter. But the reason I wanted to do this half an hour today, and now we're 33 past, is for exactly this. It is obviously important to Dini, who is a prime user and representative, that reading must come very close to some kind of annotating. So that's why it is a very, very, it is one of those things that, okay, that is a top line thing. We're going to look at lots of different things, but for an academic, many academics, Mark being different, because Mark doesn't really annotate in the same way, I've learned. One of the important use cases is you gotta highlight when you read. So, it's good. We just put an underline under it and we keep going. Yeah, Fabienne.
Yeah, so I've been rendering PDF and HTML on my server and then serving it on the headset for 8 years. I don't know, like a long time now, because there was no other practical solution. But I would argue, so first that works, and in the current setup, we can do that. It's not a problem. And indeed, if we use layers, we do have good results. What I think Adam shown recently is that on a Quest 3 or on a modern headset, we can render large documents and in rather good quality rather quickly. So that's today, that's January 2024. We're not going backward. We're definitely not going to have lower performance. And I would argue that's quite usable today. Is it good enough? No. Is it good enough anyway in any other solution compared to whatever amazing screens we all have in front of us, even printed on old school paper? Probably not. But I would argue, for the sake of exploration and making the medium we're working with malleable, which is not just like sci-fi reading, it's reading a document, as Dini said, maybe not shouting at it, but nearly. So you do have something like an interaction going on. It's not a passive thing. So for this, I would tend to argue for something that is fully rendered on the device as is today, maybe with some limitation, with a bit of frustration in terms of quality, but I would argue that that works now.
Thank you. That
Yeah,
is very, very useful. We got to figure out what to do here.
Yeah, totally. Well, so the source of a layers texture can originate from the Quest as well as from the desktop device. So again, like having a sort of a disinterested kind of ad hoc connection between multiple clients means that you'll be able to pass these things around and have them served from wherever to whomever in a way that means that modular performance, you'll be able to get it working wherever you want. So I think that like the suggestion to take a look at the sort of visual quality obtainable from layers is separate to that, to where they have to originate.
Just want to remind you all, Adam just made a entry for today in Slack. So unless you have something like I got to get a coffee, please put it in the Slack thread, not just Slack loose, but in the thread for today. Peter.
Yes, I was wondering if Brendel could speak to what kind of integration there's going to be for text-to-speech and speech-to-text in the Apple Vision Pro, and would we be able to annotate verbally as opposed to trying to make a selection of some object flowing in 3D space? It might be a lot easier. Simply say, select the second paragraph of page 64. And would we have the ability to do that with the Apple system?
Yeah. So in terms of like an oblique sort of like put that there, that's going to be down to how intelligently you interpret the orally dictated commands, but definitely text to speech and speech to text work within WebXR, so that you have sort of a Mac quality capacity for being able to process speech and then respond to it. So I built a painting app where you paint with your fingers and you build primitives by putting them in certain locations and things. That's not currently the case in Quest. They don't have their text to speech and hooked up, and they don't have speech recognition through the web speech recognition API. I'm going to fight them about it again at the next meeting I have. But it's the sort of thing that if you're willing to send through to a different service, then you would have the ability to be able to kind of broker a connection to obtain the the textual content of speech, because it does support the microphone.
Mark, then Ken.
Just very quickly, I was thinking when we were reading through the initial list, the one thing I didn't see was being able to actually remove the text from the page. And because I didn't want to diverge it, but as Deanie spoke, I thought, yeah, this actually thing, it really is what I want to be able to do as an academic. The page is limiting in that regard. What I want is the text so I can skim it, deconstruct it, because an academic text is effectively a lot of knowledge. It's a whole environment compressed into a very tight straitjacket. So you don't read it as you would, a novel or something. You skim through it, you bounce around, and part of it is you're trying to work out how much you already know, and then don't need to revalidate what's new and what you need to pick up. And only then can you realistically come back and read that. And if that reading runs over something as abstract as a page break, well, that's no help, because now you've got a completely unwanted a manifestation of a physical sort of break in something where you don't need it, where you're actually trying to comprehend. So ideally, the first thing is to take the text off the page. But I understand we have a constraint in terms of what PDFs offer us, because they're a lossy form of storage. So we lose text fidelity when we put our text into it. But nonetheless, I think it is worth bearing in mind that fact that for an academic use, or certainly for more from the teaching academic than the student, that sort of skim reading or sort of non-linear reading, in a sense, is actually quite important.
Absolutely. I was just going to say really briefly, the question of what can be done on the Apple Vision Pro or the Quest is in a way irrelevant, because we're developing for WebXR. We're not doing anything native at this point. It's useful and fun to know, but we need to constrain ourselves to
in the context of WebXR, so Quest on WebXR does not support speech. Quest actually does support speech, but it just hasn't hooked it up to WebXR yet, which is why it'll be easier to bully them into it.
Yeah, thanks, Brandel. Ken, please.
Oh, mute.
Yeah, speaking to that point, there are quite a few. I mean, I talk all the time. I'm probably not the only one with the Meta WebXR team in Seattle, and I try to bully them. But I don't want to bully them too much, because I'm hoping they'll give us research money. You have to bully gently. But there are a bunch of things, like, for example, the depth. That, hey, I can get that right now in the game engines, Unity and Unreal, but I can't quite get that in WebXR, which means I can't put a person in front of a CGI object, which is very annoying. But the way that we're dealing with those things now, and I'm not saying that this is the solution, it's just how we can move forward, is, and also because my MacBook is 100 times faster than my, this is just a tiny little Android system that's battery powered. So even though it theoretically can do things, there are some things that it couldn't quite do fast enough. So I tend to do everything by networking together the clients and saying, hey, I'll just talk into my computer and pretend that I'm talking into the Quest 3, and then use the facility that's on one client and just act like it's happening on another client. And I'm not saying that this is how we deploy to the world. I'm just saying this is how, using WebXR, we can move forward in January 2024. So even though I can make images on a Quest 3, it's really not leaning into its strengths. And so I'd rather go ahead and offload that to the more powerful computer and keep the CPU free on the Quest 3. But these are just practical engineering things, just because I find that that's the way I can move forward right now.
They're not practical engineering things. They are the definitions of the landscape on which we are trying to build. So it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. But also a point that might be worth emphasizing for Deanie as well is simply the fact that these are sort of pre-prepared on the desktop computer versus the headset doesn't mean that they're not dynamic. They can still be updated tens of times a second. so that whatever annotation markup manipulation you want is still appropriate. It's just that it's not happening at the 90 frames a second that the headset has to be doing these things or anything like that. It's something on a cadence where it's kind of requested on the basis of an update. And those can be easily kind of shipped through. Like I said, it supports video, so it'll support the 2 or 3 frames at most that you need in order to be able to support seemingly live updates of highlighting and annotation.
I have many things to say, but Alan has more.
Well, this is another just quick comment about that. And I'll try and loop it into the larger stuff. Before I get into that, I'll say that some of the stuff we talked about on Wednesday is that Monday would be kind of free form like it is now, because it seems to work. But on Wednesday, it's going to be more about the project base and probably a little bit more, well, ideally, more focused and addressing a particular issue. But what Ken brought up, I think, is a perfect example of why research at this phase is so critical. That example speaks to like a different frame of mind of a, for lack of a better term, multimodal approach, right? Like using what's in the computer naturally. And then maybe the thrust of the project becomes, okay, how to create a great channel between what the computer does naturally and what it's already in WebXR, right? And it's like, and that becomes a more interesting vector than, let's figure out everything that we can do in WebXR, right? I don't think that would violate the project itself, and it might make some things much easier, some distant land much more like lower hanging fruit. So those examples are excellent, and more of them would be great, so we can research even what it can and can't do. That was yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. More later.
Yeah, I'm grateful for this discussion as well, even though it complicates things. It's an important complication to learn at this point, so thank you. So now I'm going to ask a very specific implementation question as kind of taking a sounding. So this user, let's use Deanie as the user. She puts on the headset, it's already connected to her library. And she is going through documents, she's holding one, and she decides to add an annotation, highlight something. First of all, what is she holding to begin with in this scenario? And how do things change for her to be able to do the selection and highlighting? Just
I
technically.
wouldn't be holding it for one thing. I'd want it in front of me, so I have 2 hands free to do what I wanted to do with the text, right?
Oh, when I'm saying holding, I mean that you are in control of it. One of the great things, of course, is to be in the location that you want. What I mean is it's no longer just in the library as a thing there. That's what I mean.
So it's hovering in front of me as I would want it to.
It may be hovering in front of you, or you may choose it to put it down on your desk. So when you select it, there's the surface of the desk that your hand goes against. But these are interesting things we need to experiment with. The question is more, how do we make it look really good when you're reading and annotating, which to you should be the same thing, but technically may have a wrinkle. So
I think the question is more, well, okay, sorry.
I was going to say, one thing I'll say about the VR experience that I really like is the cinematic experience, right? The feeling that you're in a space where the material and the information in front of you is writ large, right? I don't read on my desk at all. In fact, I try to read up with book holders and things like that. It's very awkward. So my interest in reading in XR is to have it in front of me, almost like a cinematic, like a big screen in front, a big bunch of text in front of me that I can see very clearly and move around in and actually touch viscerally. And so, so that's some little things like that I think are important to think about. That's very different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is when we need to experiment, because you may want to do that for most of the time, but then you may, for instance, decide you want to use the physical wall in your office to put 20 pages on, so you have a substrate through which you can touch to do something. But these are things we need to experiment with. My question really to Adam, because he has his hand up now, is to go between the pretty reading, where it's really optimized for that, to the being able to act with it. What actually happens, Adam?
Well, that's another question. I just want to comment on the on text selection in XR, WebXR, and or doing things with the text, not just looking at rectangles. I think we could also find a halfway point where we have a somewhat visual approach to it, that we could rip parts of images out from the PDF. Is quite stupid, but if you find a quote, you could rip the image of that quote out. You could potentially OCR it if you just want to. It's a quite roundabout way of doing it, but it's not. It's quite quick, so the laptop or could do the heavy lifting for OCRing with sending a picture back. But imagine being able to tear a book apart while keeping the original. That could be a very visual and visceral way of working with it that is mostly image based, but we could get back to finding what text you actually ripped out. And also for text selection, I think we could get a bit stuck into the model that we have a cursor that we drag over a text to select it. We could, in XR, we have all our fingers. We could just put 2 fingers from the start to the end and get the whole paragraph for selection in one motion and rip it out. So we have more means to do text selection. Potentially we have eye selection as well in the future. But right now we have the voice and hands mostly. So just putting 2 fingers on a text and ripping it out and get an image, ripped out image, could be enough to just to let us know what it is about, and then comment it, and then write or comment on that little quote you ripped out with your voice and add an annotation to it. That's kind of more doable with the current tech, more easily doable than having a full-blown text selection PDF apparatus in place, which can also be done, but it's harder. Yeah, over on that.
Can I comment on that real quick? Because that's also a conversation in Slack going on right now. And I think it underlies, at least to me, an important point. I mean, I think everybody here is a fan of the great story of moving from Newtonian physics to quantum physics, and wow, what an exciting time! All new paradigm, you know, and how to throw away all this old way of thinking. And you know, if I were to say, oh, we're at that moment right now, we're at a paradigm shift, you know, to quantum, we'd all be like, yeah, VR is the new quantum. And then in the next breath, we would go about thinking about VR the same way we think about making 2D documents and interactions, right? Which is like sticking to Newtonian physics when you're just been made aware of quantum. Sorry for making that overused metaphor, but I want to stress that, like, you know, when we talk about highlighting, that it is a great tried and true technique, but it was designed for cursors and keyboards, right? When there wasn't even an ability to touch with your fingers, or I'm pretty sure highlighting is even pre-mouse, right? So when we have some of these conversations, it would be good to talk about what's beneath the highlighting, right? What do you actually want to extract? Does it require the starting point and this ending point, and that's exactly what I need? Or is that a trained behavior that we've had from, you know, 30 years of highlighting, 40 years, whatever? And that's a way of thinking that's going to crop up in probably every single one of our conversations, right? Are we just borrowing this old model and trying to apply it to the new model without exploring what is latent in the new model itself, and might feel unfamiliar, but is actually way more powerful?
I'm going to let Ken, Rob, and Dini comment on this. But first, I just think it's important that while we have these questions about motivations and doing things in entirely new ways, we mustn't forget that it is an actual medium that exists now, meaning there are these weird limitations that have just been brought up. And you know, even though we want to design past them, so to speak, we do know a few things, and that's why I did the document at the beginning. We do know we want documents to go into the headset. We do know we want to read them, and so on. There are some knowns. So I do think we need to find out what is the stuff that needs to happen, because at a certain point we have to start coding to test, right? But we can easily spend another couple of years on this discussion, and we should, but it needs to
Well,
be.
that's why we're separating these kinds of discussions, right?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, and we should as a separate thing. But because it's really early days, and because we're lucky enough to have Ken here today, I think it's useful to dip into that. So Ken Robindini, please.
I wanted to make two quick points in response to that. I mean, well, not in response to that, kind of, I agree with that. One is that probably about 25 years ago, more or less, I went and visited ILM. I noticed that, actually, no, this wasn't my, this was Disney, which is even more important, Disney production in the 1990s, Disney animation. And I noticed that all of these great animators were no longer drawing on paper. They were drawing on Wacom tablets, high quality tablets, very, expensive tablets. And I said, wow, is it better? They said, no, it's not as good. And I said, well, then why did you switch over to tablets? And I said, because this has an undo function. And the important point was they needed to get their production done. And the undo function totally won out over any deficiencies in the new technology, because this time was serious for them. They couldn't afford to lose an hour because I made a mistake. And so that was an example of, even if it's not as good in some ways, there's something categorical about the new paradigm that makes it more important. And I think that's an important principle. Not that that's true all the time, but that was clearly a situation where the best people at that in the world were like, okay, I'm willing to take a step back to take a leap forward. And the other thing I wanted to mention, just because this is a personal thing, and I think this fits into the conversation we're having, people are talking about VR. And this morning I used my exercise program in VR. I put this thing on and I went into VR, and there was some beautiful mountain landscape, and somebody was like, there was a trainer in front of me, and I was jumping around and, doing stuff to music, and it was great. But I was acutely aware that because since October 10th, I have spent all of my time in XR, because that's when the Quest 3 came out, and sometime before that in the Quest Pro, I wished that I was actually doing this in my own room. And in fact, I kind of wanted to do what this guy did, which is like he's in his own space, but there's something technologically advanced going on that helps him. And I feel as though ultimately, I do not believe we're going to be all going into another world. I think we're going to be bringing all of this exciting, amazing, interactive stuff into our world. And having done both for quite a while now, I would encourage you not to just keep thinking VR, but keep the door open to the future is probably XR.
Great. Yeah. And in fact, the way we want to look at our research is at times AR is complementary to XR, and at times it's competitive too. So there might be a point at which we go, we have to take this approach that's AR and it diminishes the XR, but we get more gains, or we take a more synthetic approach to the two. Okay, sorry. Rob, go ahead.
I just want to say that I may be able to just make suggestions about things that I want, because I interact with text in a way that is not academic, but I have gotten in the habit of putting these things plentifully through a text as I read through it. I don't write on the book, and sometimes I go back and I look at these things and I don't remember why the hell I put a tag there, but there was a reason. And if I get it back, I get it back because it's important. And if I don't get it back, it probably wasn't that important. And that may be because I'm getting older, my memory isn't great, but I want to be able to to tag a text, a selection of text, have the program extract it for me, label where it came from, when I did it, all of that stuff that I think is what we all want, and then create a kind of library of that stuff. Now, most of what I read is books, So probably that's not going to be PDFs and we're not going to be able to do it, but that's an ultimate goal. And I do read a lot of PDF documents, usually science stuff. So I'd like to be able to do all that. So all I can contribute to this is what I want.
I have
That's-
noted that down now in our little notes on scenarios and so on. That makes a lot of sense. Very important point, Ken. So I do believe that our first environment background around the documents will be VR, simply because it's more controllable. And I think we should probably design that quite soon and just leave it. It should probably be a rectangular room, like a normally nice office with basic furnishings, so it's not too noisy or disruptive. However, doing that with full knowledge that we hope to be able to go into AR soon, and that these surfaces in the room will have value. Is there a general consensus on that before I hand over to all the eager hands? Or anybody just
Yeah.
hate that idea? Okay.
Well,
okay.
I hate it a bit, if it's okay. Because at least half of our targeted headsets will support some sort of AR from the beginning. So I would suggest that we put in both quite quickly. The regular room and a VR room from the start. It's quite easy to have both. They're quite similar to have both with the tech we have chosen.
I think this is a really important point, because, for instance, right now, me, like probably at least half of you, I'm sitting in front of a large display. So when I put on my headset and I do AR, that headset is quite, excuse me, that desktop is quite intrusive. You know, because it's there, right? So I'm not talking about the longer future. I absolutely want AR too, no question. But if I put on the headset, and then I kind of have to get rid of this first, and then a lot of other things are variable.
This is where doing some user research will be incredibly helpful, because we'll be able to get out of our own assumptions and invalidate some, and then also like see things that we see it in a light that we hadn't considered.
I don't think you want to do this because of your monitor. I think you want to do the XR because of your books. Your books are right there. I'm looking at everybody, and I'm seeing that half of you have a giant wall of books behind you. I realize that by next year you'll just have a single Quest. I'm sorry, Apple Vision Pro there, replacing that entire library. But at least right now, you've got a wall of books. And I've got books all over my office, like, on all the walls. And it's like, I want to be able to, what about that book? And I don't want to, from the beginning, make design decisions that means those books are no longer in my perceptual space, because I think that's kind of missing an opportunity here for the future of text.
Okay, so on this incredibly important topic, which is the entire everything we're designing except for the actual documents, shall we now immediately reverse what I just said? Because we got to pick one. We can't spend.
We don't have to pick one right now. It's not affecting a single line of code if we don't pick one right now. So we can move on.
I agree completely. We don't have to pick one.
Yeah.
Well, if we're designing for two very, very different environments, there are very, very different opportunities. And, I think we need.
I really don't think so. I think that everything that you can do in a VR environment, you can do in an AR environment. You're just not obliged to provide all of the pixels.
I don't know about that, because a very simple thing that a lot of people have been talking about is the ability to take something from a document, either a picture, a piece of text, and tear it off. Then the question becomes, where do you put it? And if you have a known wall, you can put it on that wall. That becomes your wall of cuttings. Of course, you can have it floating in space. I'm not saying it has to have that. But what I'm saying is that the giving semantic meaning to space in your physical room is going to be important for one of the things we're doing. If you guys think that is important, I'm totally fine with us doing that. But I think that if we're going to be spending a lot of resources on AR and VR, I think that may be too much for us. That is my feeling. But if you guys,
we don't have to support it. We can just treat it as an exploration. We're learning the material, right? So we can just, I make personal websites for myself probably like 5 times a year, and I drop them all. I just want to learn more, right? So we can think about it that way, like, hey, let's see what it's like in AR, and then we're like, you know what, this is going to take too much work. Screw it, we're just going to focus on VR. I think everybody would be in support of that, right? Like if we tried out one and we're like, there's too much in this, we'll pick it up next year, you know?
We'll put that in an Alan coordinated discussion, and I'll drop it for now, and we move on to Leon. Thank you for your patience, Leon.
You're welcome. Well, very welcome. So I just thought I want to summarize some beautiful things I heard so far, and I want to perhaps suggest a progressive enhancement way of doing these things. If you just forget about these two directions of like having a sort of reading experience and sort of like a manipulation experience, which might have like two separate development directions, one with XR layers for the reading, one for manipulation. You could also take a step back and basically what Alan said, like, hey, what do we want to do here? Maybe we don't even know why.
We just lost you.
We lost his image first, and then we lost his sound.
Yeah, but it's such a pretty picture. Let's give him another second. I'll just type there. Okay. All right. Well, fortunately, drop him for now. Dini, please, and then Leon whenever he comes back.
Yeah, so I just dropped an article in the Slack channel from the New York Times this morning that I was reading. It's about memory, right? So the other thing that I'm concerned about is being able to have instant recall, right? When I'm standing in the classroom and students ask me a question, like, where does that come from? Or where did you get that idea? I can tell them the exact author, page, and author, book, and page number, right? I can actually quote lines of text from a poem or a story, Homer, being one of the authors that I could quote. And I want to be able to do that. I want to recall instantly. So I don't want to lose my memory. And the discussion that was in this article talks about tricks to do in order to retain your memory, especially as you age, right? So that sits out there in my brain, thinking about how I can retain my memory. At the same time, I want to be able to do things in this new environment that's different from how I interact with text. And this responds to something Ken was talking about. But I think what Mark Anderson is suggesting is that we be able to interact with the text. And, so I do highlight, and I don't highlight to be able to extract. Sometimes I highlight just to keep my place in a text and come back to it, right? But then there's times when I bracket paragraphs and I make a comment, right? Then I highlight that in a different color, and I come back to my paper and I hand type it. Once I type something and I see it and I type it, I have an eidetic memory, which means I can remember it word for word, right? That comes in handy as an academic. And so to be able to do that kind of experience in a VR environment, I think is helpful because it accomplishes many things. Also, but then doesn't address, Kim, what you're talking about is what's new in this environment. And I'm not quite sure I can envision what that is and how that might impact us over time. So I'll just leave that there. Thank you.
Alan, I hope you're taking notes. That was a lot of what we need to go through. These are the important issues to go through. Thank you very much, Dini. Peter, Brendel, and Leon, we lost you, but you are back, and now you're on the queue. I hope that's okay. Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, my only real hesitancy with AR is the issue that lots of users will be in cluttered environments, or you'll be in a confined space riding a commuter train. And I love the idea of being able to access my books, but I don't have all of my books just on the wall behind me. I have walls of books in every single room.
Yeah.
And
me too.
In a VR environment, we could potentially gather the spines of all of those books into one space where they'd all be much more accessible. If we're in an AR mode, you have to deal with the clutter issue. You have to deal with the fact that a segment of users are going to be in cramped spaces, and all of the elements that I don't care about in the room are going to be intruding unless we have an AR system where it has a model of the room completely empty, devoid of anything in it, and the software is sophisticated enough to be able to mask out elements from the real room and replace them with the previous recordings of the completely empty room before anything was put in it, so that we could just have the books in the room be visible, but have the pile of snail mail that we haven't gone through in the last week that's sitting on the end table, and whatever else might be in the room that's extraneous, screened out of the virtual environment. So that kind of makes me lean more towards, if we have to pick between AR and VR, maybe straight VR would be cleaner until the computing technology on the AR side is at the point where we can start masking out selected things. Otherwise, I'm trying to focus on my academics. I don't want to have all those extra distractions. Even just having stuff happening outside of a window can be an annoyance at times.
I absolutely have great sympathy for that perspective, Peter. Oh no, Adam. All right, see you later, Adam. Where's he going? Okay,
I
Brandel.
think it's Leon's turn, right?
Yeah, no, but Leon's going to talk properly. That's why we're just following the order. He dropped out, so he's okay. Brandel's not going to go on forever, right, Brandel?
We'll see how it goes.
Oh,
So,
maybe he will. Okay.
I wanted to talk about something that Rob mentioned about the way he was using sticky notes, sticky highlights through the length of a book. Something that will be important to think about is, what we've talked about so far is being able to represent a page of a book or a number of pages of a book, but not actually a book or a document per se. And that's one of the rationales behind this Gutenberg thing, where you have the ability to load up the entirety of Alice in Wonderland from Project Gutenberg. And one of the things that's really doesn't happen by default is the ability to turn pages and have those pages sort of change where they are in a book. But even this abstraction doesn't have something. Somebody asked me that a while ago, like they wanted to make animated picture flip books, and so that it would be visible along the spine, all of the different pages. And I had to say to them, like, yeah, you could do that, but by default, my system doesn't, like the rest of the book doesn't exist. Only this page, the page underneath, and then the page next actually exists. And I thought I was being revolutionary by sort of preserving those other sort of physical quantities, those physical aspects and attributes that some people have incidentally made use of, but are completely absent in the context of what a PDF is. If we're talking about papers, then like this guy is less relevant. But also, like if you're actually talking about books, then the qualities of books, how thick they are, and what color, and whether the type is pressed, and things like that, is absolutely the colors and things like that is absolutely critical to be able to kind of jolt people into thinking about what documents they're manipulating and things. And so, like we should be thinking about. We should be aware of what we're not transposing and what we're not pulling through, just as much as what we are, because of the risks of forgetting the things that actually sort of comprise our tangible meat-based interaction with information in books. So that was it was a really interesting thing to go like, yeah, most of the things that people talk about with books don't support what Rob has with those sticky tabs whatsoever. But with proper thought toward it, then you can get somewhere like that.
Yeah, perfect. This is exactly what we need, and I'd love an article for the book about that, Brandel. Okay. Leon.
Yeah, I also like this sort of like sticking to the meat space interactions with books. I think that the unsophisticated version of everything we've talked about is probably going to be the most attractive to people. So I think if you start with these XR layers, which are crisp and clear to read, which maybe just render a page, and then on top of that, the sticky notes of Rob, like this is very, very easy to implement and very cheap to run standalone on the headset. And on top of these things, via a progressive enhancement way, you could build so much features on top of that, and the more sophisticated these features are, the more you can sort of like use your laptop's processing power for that. So instead of going in two directions where you would make a sort of like reading experience in the XR layer way and some other sort of like go crazy version, you could just have the core product, or sorry, core project as the XR layer reading and perhaps sticky note version or marking note version. And on top of that, all kind of features which can be disabled or enabled based on your whether you have a laptop or not. And I think if you have that fundament right, I think that could be a really, really cool way, because like the faster you introduce these crazy features or the cool features, the more we can sort of annoy people who are curious about reading an XR or writing. So yeah, that's just my few cents. I really love this idea of the simple XR layers and Rob's sticky notes, because this is very cheap to implement.
Okay, this is very, very exciting. I know I'm after you, Peter, but sorry, I have to ask a question. These Rob sticky notes, can they be written upon in the kind of environment you're now talking about, Leon? In other words, instead of writing directly on the page, is it technically easier and more robust for a user to either just put a sticky note or put a sticky note and add text on it like you would have posted?
Yes, that is very cheap. And it's like if we have a stable page to image conversion, then we can just rely on coordinates. Like at this coordinate XY, we have this sticky note and we can attach metadata on it. All this metadata will not be what I'm talking about right now is not connected to the text itself, so to the sort of semantical text, but it is a great start to sort of add metadata to pages. And this is very pragmatic, and it's also inspired by Fabian's earlier suggestion to first start with page-based metadata.
Okay, I have to ask if we can go the other way too, because in even Reader, most PDF software, you can, of course, add a sticky note and you can do selections and all that stuff, right? I guess we could have a mechanism whereby, first of all, we're in this XR space, we're reading a PDF, and Dini finds something very interesting. So she slaps a sticky note on it and she writes, "This is absolutely horrendously wrong," on the sticky note, right? And then we have a metadata system whereby on her computer laptop, that sticky note or tag or whatever we call it is now available as well as a layer on that. No, Dini, we're talking about sticky notes because it's much cheaper to implement and more robust. Because I know you want to write on the book, I do, but this is just following Leon's logic and implementation of it here, because a couple of benefits could be that this metadata is now more easily extractable, so that if you wrote down, this is a killer feature, just the word killer, it could then be possible to search based on that, because we have it's not just handwritten on the page. That's one thing. And the question of this is a very important rabbit hole, Alan, because it's one of the deep implementation issues. So the other way around that I'm wondering about is, we've talked about different means through which we can let the XR system know that certain parts of the book are special. So with the same logic, with the same with the same architecture, could we, for instance, as you know, with our own book, select a thing in the PDF on our computer and say this is actually so and so large format image or 3D model, whatever it is, whatever augmented stuff it is. And when you're then in the headset, because of the system understands this tag putting, it will know that this area is special. Does it work both ways?
Well, if that's a question for me, I think this can be done. I would just view it as it's just an extra layer on top of the page where you can underline, write, or put a sticky note. And these things, these separate things, the underline, the sticky note, or just like you paint a stroke, that can sort of contain extra metadata. And I think especially when you have a laptop, you can even process later with AI that, oh wait, this line or this writing is pointing to this sentence. So, and then it's sort of like the semantical translation can be done where we really have both ways. But I think to do that in real time immediately, I think it doesn't have to be done in the headset, because the person who writes the annotation knows that, yeah, it's about this. Maybe it's an idea to offload the real sort of like semantical connection to a sort of like a post-face thing. Yeah, because that's probably going to be very CPU intensive. Or you could perhaps do a setting like, hey, I really want to annotate this on a really low level, semantical level. So, but I think in both ways, and I want to emphasize that sticky notes can also mean writing. It's just whatever you do with your finger becomes a metadata extensible object on top of that page.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Peter, Robin. I just see in the sidebar, Alan, the thing is, we need a mechanism through which the reader can somehow annotate. That's something we know, because that is a core academic discipline. Mark likes to annotate separately, so he will write in a notebook. Dini likes to do it on the page, and Rob reminded us that sticky notes exist, which is brilliant. So the reason this is important to talk about so early, and I don't believe it's a technical rabbit hole, Leon has the idea of having a semantic layer on top for metadata. And this, if this works well, and it's on nicely readable documents, it may allow us to do a lot of the things we will hopefully come up with in the further discussion, Alan. So that's why we need to sound out some more of the realities, I think. That's all. Okay, Peter. Oh, so nice and quiet you are, Peter.
Oh, I hate when that happens. I've been reading Hyperreality, The Art of Designing Impossible Experiences, and that's an approach that was taken by Curtis Hickman of The Void. And what he did was he was combining tangible objects with VR experiences. So you'd be in the VR environment, you'd be working with the physical prop, but you would see it as the item from the virtual world. And it occurs to me that maybe for dealing with a book, you could have a physical book that would actually have completely blank pages in it and just be a prop. But in an AR environment, the content of the actual book that you're referencing could be automatically overlaid onto the pages. So as you're flipping through the pages of the book, that would correspond to changing pages in the PDF. The PDF would be imaged on the server. The contents would be flashed through to the headset, and the headset would show them superimposed over the surface of the book prop that you're manipulating.
This is definitely the kind of thing, Peter, that needs to go in our Alan chats. Absolutely. To make physical books digital, so to speak. Thank you for that reference. I may even do a Mark Anderson and buy it. Rob.
The sticky notes, now you got me going on this, provides the same functionality as writing in the margins of the book, except that the margins become infinite, which I think is a good advantage. You can paste stuff into it that you want to link to. That occurred to me, maybe we could even create links to other places in the document, just to, somehow to put in the sticky notes, and create a kind of three-dimensional. I think you've already done it with Reader, but there's a lot of possibilities here for the sticky notes becoming vast, and how they're going to be organized is going to be important. I have notes in Apple that are basically all random, and I have to search for things. So unclutter my mind, please.
Rob, thank you for that addition. And Fabienne, please.
Yeah, so I'll just my own personal interest, but for example, what's a sticky note in XR, being VR, AR? To me, that's interesting. What's a sticky note? What's a highlight? And rather, what goes beyond the highlight and sticky notes we've been using for decades or even century? To me, that's the fundamental question. And is there one of those that's really improve the way I'm going to read and understand a paper, for example? To me, that's interesting. How is it going to be implemented? Like, is it a sidecar file? Is it a central database? Are we merging back to the PDF? They're important questions because it has to be done. But I'll be honest, I don't care. One way has to be picked, and maybe in some contexts, one way is better than another. But like, it doesn't get me going. It's not very thrilling for me, let's say. And yes, I might eat my words a couple of months or weeks down the line because it was not a wise implementation. But to me, that's okay. That's a risk I'm willing to take. So is it something that's going to be merged back? Is it a centralized database? Is it a cloud one? Is it on the device, on the desktop, elsewhere? I'll be honest, not what I believe is the deep question there.
Fabienne, on that, yes, I mean, it may go all over the place and turn out to be a rubbish idea or a brilliant idea, but the metadata, the way that I'm looking at it is that we as users get to highlight things in our documents so that they are both findable and analyzable later. This is why in Reader have been testing this thing of run an AI in the document, whatever prompt you want, and then the result is saved in a metadata that is searchable later. Right? That is something that now works, and it's really fun. I'm thinking when we're in a VR, XR, AR environment, of course, we would like to have a full control over how we either select text or add annotations and add value to it. There's absolutely no question about that. And we should experiment as much as we want. My only concern is we got to actually build this and then maybe build another version. I'm really worried about over talking it. So I'm very glad that Alan and others are balancing pieces of lead for that. Fabienne, do you have a comment on that before Mark or something else?
Yeah, very briefly. It's a little bit, let's say, boring in the sense that I have my little video projector that I use at home and at work. I have the little Raspberry Pi there, and I'm setting it up now with MiniDLNA, which is how to share video files over the network. And to me, that's very pragmatic and useful. And one feature that I mentioned, I think last time, or maybe on Slack, was how you can resume a video. So if you watch the video on the video projector, you can keep watching it on your smartphone or even on the headset. And I think that's a really important and interesting feature. Again, the how it's done, like I do it right now because I must, but I'm not thrilled by it. It's more like it's nearly sysadmin work. So it enables new usages, which is the exciting part. But I don't think for us all together to discuss on the detail of the implementation is that exciting. And I think it's best if like what is indeed a highlight, and we can make assumption on how. And again, we fix it down the line if the implementation just doesn't fit this new usage.
Mark.
Yeah, so actually prompted by the last couple of observations, something that sort of swims into focus for me is the fact that, I mean, in a sense, there are two axes here. There is, for some people, an annotation is different to a highlight, is different to something else. Yet they're all a class of annotations. I actually don't write in books. I mean, I used to say it's partly because I was told not to draw in books as a child, but actually it's really because I have really poor motor skills and my writing isn't particularly legible. So I write in the book. All I've done is put mess in the book that I can't read. So, I've always, the digital affordances we have now have been a joy to me because I can actually find stuff that, you know, if it's on my side notes, I'll never find, or I won't be able to read them. So what that says to me is that there are two different axes to capture. There is the fact that things that some people call different things actually have a different relationship to the thing that they are annotating. But at a more digital level, they're all just annotations, and we shouldn't draw too much distinction in others. As long as we can capture what that annotation is, another piece of metadata will say this one is a highlight and this one is a something else. And so it's not a zero-sum game at all. And so I think we can get down a big rabbit hole of worrying too much what the different things are. If what we're putting together, the sort of frameworks that we're doing, now I'm seeing if I'm watching Alan's face here, but if what we're doing allows for basically all these variations, then I think that's a very positive path, and that's not actually closing off anyone's experience. Thank you.
Yeah, a good point. And Alan, please go ahead. I just put here briefly in the notes that not all of them are currently as implementable. That's why this is kind of important to go through as well.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll go quick and Fabian, actually, it's funny. You said exactly what I was typing, and it was like a weird mind meld for a second. That was fun. And I want to actually see the demo that you mentioned that you were interested in demoing. So maybe like in 15 minutes, whatever, we can move to demoing that. I would love to see that. A quick statement about the I totally agree, Mark, about the annotations, and what I love all the varieties of brainstorming, and obviously brainstorming is inherently open-ended and everything's appreciated. What I want to then put a stopgap in is what tends to happen in this group, but also just with technologists in general, is we'll get excited about an approach, we'll explore an approach, we'll figure out a solution to that specific approach, and then suddenly we'll be like, okay, so it's decided, it's agreed that that's what we're going to do. And that's how a lot of developers think, right? And that's how a lot of times things get built, and then months later you find out, oh, you know what, why did we do it that way? And so the thing to do, which you learn after having done that a few times, is, well, what do we have in our heads that we think is absolutely totally obvious, but might actually just be an assumption? How can we disprove that? Well, we do that by talking to a range of people and seeing what they think. And then it's not like we're trying to build for everyone. Obviously, there's a degree where we're scratching our own itch, but maybe we find out that that itch is a little deeper than we initially thought, and some of the things that we thought that were on the surface don't matter nearly as much, right? So it's great to go down these, I still consider it a rabbit hole, which doesn't mean that it's not important. Let's figure out, let's play with how annotation could work in XR, as long as it doesn't necessarily mean this is the next thing to build, if that makes sense. At least that's how I like to do it. I like to test our thinking. I forget the right words for it, but there's words for it. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Ken?
I completely agree with that. In fact, my solution to that is I just build lots and lots and lots of different things, and then as quickly as I can, I show them to people. And the goal is to show them to people who have no connection whatsoever with my nerdy computer science stuff. And I mean, I showed a cool XR demo to somebody a few months ago, and I noticed that, as soon as they had to press this grip button instead of that trigger button, they're like, oh, that's a computer game thing. I don't want to have to deal with that. And they just put it down. And I never then had anybody ever push this button ever again. It's like, okay, I'm done with that whole assumption, because I've been hanging out with too many computer nerds, and I hadn't realized that. And I think basically my approach is throw out 90% of the stuff that I've made, because exactly for the reason you said, confirmation bias. I made it, it must be perfect. And of course, that's obviously not true, because other people turn out not to be me. But I wanted to say something else in addition, which is this is just experience I'm beginning to have, which is now, and this isn't, I don't want to get too much into the VR versus XR thing, because this might be true for VR as well, but I'm in my apartment right now, and there are various experiments that I've been doing that live in different places in my living room. And when I put on my headset, they're there, and they're still there. And if there's a particular document, it would be there. And if there were particular annotations or other things, it would be somewhere else. And they live there, just like my books live on my shelf, and I know to go there. And my place memory, this isn't a conscious thing, is just kicking in that that's there, that's there, that's there. And if I need that to open up, it opens up. And I'm finding that, my hypothesis is that place memory is actually much more expandable from the way we're used to encountering it from our natural selves, where everything just has to be the physical world as we found it. And I think that if I could have things just open up and expand and move around and I understood it and it was repeatable, those things would still live in that place in my room, but there would be a lot of flexibility. So I'm just beginning to understand that I can explore that, because in my mind right now, they're right there, even though I'd have to put on my headset to see them. So that's something I think important for us to be humble about and understand, that as physical creatures, we probably have superpowers that have not yet come out because we haven't yet been playing with this stuff enough yet, and we should be open to that.
Yeah, here, absolutely. Douglas Adams, way back in the time, I remember he talked to me about how he called something digital graffiti, where you would have information in the physical world, digital, but you have to be in that spot in order to read it. So that's brilliant. I've written that up. I strongly, vehemently, aggressively, happily, lovingly agree with that approach. And that is why I'm really pushing to start building, because I'd rather build and throw away than argue around the issue forever. So it's really, really useful to have these fundamental discussions today to know what kind of things need to be supported in order to do these tests. And Ken, your experience and perspective is, of course, extremely valuable for that. So Adam and Andrew have started working on just getting stuff to the headset, which is obviously crucial. Now we need to start talking a little bit about what do we need to build fundamentally, so we can start doing the experiments that you're talking about, Ken, because once we're doing these deep discussions that Alan is talking about, at a certain point, we've got to test it. I know we all agree on that.
I can add a little something to that I'm definitely going to want help with, and it's a very Bob Horn kind of thing. Because we're talking heads right now, and this has been the format, we say a lot of brilliant stuff and then just completely wipe it out and forget it, right? Like already we've jumped from, and this is great, right? We've jumped from focusing on a single document and the annotations or the sticky notes that are around it, to now there's this, we could veer into where should a document be in a room, right? And they're both very fruitful. I want to figure out a language to hold on to those different kinds of concerns, right? So almost like early on, I'm going to need help with this, and I've tried to start to put some of it together, but a kind of an anatomy of the full range of experiences that includes the ecosystems and dependencies, right? So we could say like, oh, we're talking about this now. I know for later on, it's going to be, I can put it next to that little icon that has a sticky note versus this icon that's like a document in a room, if that makes sense. Because there's so many different facets to this. It's never going to be a perfect document, but if it helps with the collaboration when we're talking about stuff, then it may be a step in the right direction. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion for that is the document that I showed you at the beginning of this. And I'm not saying it should stay on my computer or be under my editorship. I'm very happy with the work that you've shown, Alan, in Slack with your diagrams and so on. But I do think it is exactly right. We need to note these things down in a shareable way. I've been adding some comments while we've been talking on this particular one. So as a point of procedure, then, what should be the best way of doing that?
Let's table that one if you don't mind. I mean, Ken had something to say, and I do have a lot of thoughts on that, but you're okay.
That was just, I mistakenly forgot to take my hand down. That's all. Sorry.
Okay. And I want to get to Fabian's demo too. But the best format for that quickly, like I'm happy with the WordPress thing. And I'm also doing my notes and some various tools. The structuring of it though, and this is where the user story mapping comes in, is one point that it makes that I really like is that if you have all these ideas and they're just text, you get you get all this extra exhaust. And so a mix of a visual or semantic aspect, either through illustrations like Airbnb service design or just like little icons to say like, here's the kind of the vibe that we're talking about. That's what I'm trying to figure out, little visual molecules as one part to help us quickly identify where things can wind up. That's all I have to say about that.
I think we should start with exactly that on Monday, Alan. I think today has been very, very useful on the a bit of realities and a bit of headwind. The discussion of what kind of manifestations of a document in XR work and which ones don't. One is pretty and one is interactive. It seems to be slightly the discussion here. So Alan, should we say that on Monday you chair a whiteboard session on this?
You're talking about Wednesday or Monday?
I'm talking about Monday, but we might as
Okay.
well do it on Wednesday as well, kind of flip it a little bit.
Well, I think a whiteboard session on Monday is a great idea. We'll constrain it maybe, and just do a little dip our toes into the waters of collaborative whiteboarding to try and figure out stuff. I won't have a complete document for that, but it'll be, I've already got some stuff. I mean, I could show it now. I got some stuff that is meant to be prompts. And some of it we can go into on Wednesday. Wednesday, I think it's also going to be important to kind of get on the same page as to like, what are our various concerns? There's the obvious make a product, make a project, but it, our approaches are kind of haphazard. So I want to come to an agreement on that. So, we can decide, do we want to have this main flagship one, or do we want to take the approach of a platform to do lots of experiments, stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think experiments absolutely is what we're doing. I think that the entirety of this needs to be designed around that one academic that Dini and I walk up to in Poland towards the end of the year, put the headset on, and we have some, a default library, but they can easily choose their own library later. And we can, we as a community need to script what this interaction should be based on what these specific kinds of academics actually would want to do in there. And clearly, we're talking about things we need to discuss, Alan, in the way that you're talking about. How to view a document in itself is a big issue. How to interact with it, and then how to view a library. I do think we should probably try to look at how. So there's no bifocal headset, Peter, so that's not going to work. Anyway, sorry, just saw that message in the chat. Yeah, so I really think that dealing with just the metadata itself is going to be a huge issue and an important issue. We need to find a way to make a JSON file or whatever it is that says this is all the known stuff we have about our library and contents, but it also has the growth opportunity for more when we think about it. I don't think we should make perfect the enemy of test now. I very much agree with Ken's perspective of let's do it, and if it's trash, we trash it. I don't want Andrew to sit here and be frustrated. I want him to be overworked in a nice way. And we learn stuff, and if we have to, we start with a new code base in 2 months. So
there's an aspect too of a lot of the things that we might not think of as projects or products yet might be like, they might be the kinds of things that actually take very little code. I'll give you a scenario. We could find out if we do the right kind of research that, to our surprise, the most valuable thing that we could possibly do is to make it easy, frictionless to get something out of VR, right? Which would go against so many other assumptions. Why would you put it in VR in the first place? But maybe that's a thing where it's like, oh, I would totally use VR. I love it, but I just can't get anything out of it. And so then we shift all our focus to how to make it easy to get X, Y, and Z out, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
that might even be more packaging or thinking about it than it is lots of lines of code.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Making the metadata go from the headset to the computer is important, absolutely. But when we're talking about the research and the thinking, as research, talking to other users, don't forget, we do have a good couple of academics in this group, so there are a few knowns.
Yeah, I do want to actually do extensive interviews with them.
But yeah, so the whole, we really need to get the knowns done. Next week is going to, well, soon it's going to be the 40th anniversary of the Mac. I'm going to be there with all these amazing people and all that stuff. We're not going to do demos or anything, but I really don't want to be just at a talking point then. I want to be at a talking point and we're testing this. We're testing that. Test. Because the reality of this digital thing is both the idea of what this might be, but it's also the available APIs, the plumbing. We didn't know until Ken just said, most of us anyway, I didn't know, the difference between kind of reading layers and all. We need to see what actually works, right? So test and think, or rather test and dialogue in parallel. I know you're a bit wary of this, Alan, but let's put it this way. If we manage to build the infrastructure, just upload a document, you can, so Dini can hold it and see how it feels, and it's her document. And it's just not pleasant. Do it again.
Totally, I've got no problem with that. Let's do it. Let's get I think the very first steps have been well established, and
holding to place, Dini, not to hold it so it doesn't fall in zero gravity. Mark, bring some sense into this conversation.
That's a large ask from me, but anyway, I'll give it a go. Now, I was just pondering on the sort of reference of metadata and stuff, and one of the things I find myself reflecting on at the moment with the number of sort of projects ongoing is that I'm constantly reminded that metadata doesn't actually turn out the shape I thought it would be. By that I mean that there's the technical framework, the encoding you put on it, which is important, but at least that tends to have logical constraints. It's also important because it's got to talk to one another. But the more I'm doing textual stuff, not in a strictly paper or pretending to be paper form, the more I find that the information teases apart in a way that doesn't just fall out from standard writing experience. And I don't know the answers. The whole point is what I'm mainly discovering is not what I thought it was going to be. And that's become important to me because that in turn offers possibilities and or constraints as to what we then do with it. So the problem I do find is it's terribly easy to imagine something and then you become very invested in the outcome. But actually the rest of it is magical thinking in between. So, a challenge here is actually sort of thinking less in terms of I put this there, or I take that there, but what does that actually mean to get that? And this is very pertinent to the point sort of Ken raised about, okay, well, look, if the reading experience is important, just make a good picture, do that somewhere you can do it fast, put it in front of you, don't worry about the rest. But actually, if that was the least important thing, then, it's problematic. And so it's teasing it back, and because in the same way that we might want to render a page to read very quickly, actually what we might want to render very quickly is not even a page at all. We might want a very precise crosscut of the information that comprises the document that probably isn't even the linear text on the page, for sake of argument. That we can now do. And the danger is, in a sense, we just end up reading a paper page in Excel, which is great, but it's not exactly, I sort of sense from the sort of judges' comments in the grant proposal as just reading a bit of white rectangle in VR space isn't exactly a groundbreaker. I mean, it is in some ways, and the technology of it,
all right,
but in experience terms, it isn't.
All right, I have to comment on that before you, Brandel, sorry. We have to take some realities into account, right? First reality is we're dealing with PDFs. We have no choice. That is what we told Sloan. That's what we're doing. That's what the ACM Digital Library does. So it has to be that. It should be that plus, obviously. There's no question about that. I'm in dialogue with them to provide downloads for additional media as well, HTML and so on, right? They know they need to do lots of things. But one of the things we have to do is to present PDFs nicely in XR. That is not up for discussion because we have no choice. It is what we've been paid to do, at least paid to code. To make that amazing, one of the things Fabian made us do, a year ago, was to take a document and put it out, every page up on a wall to help us get an overview. So even within that horrible constraint, but of course, Mark, we should be able to go further than that. But let's just keep it in mind. We have to do this as well. That's all. Brandel.
I wanted to just jump on the a comment about holding and sort of the vantage point in relationship to documents. It's a super it's practical for the foreseeable future. Is that monofocal displays have their image distance around 1 to 1.5 meters, which means that depending on people's capacity to fixate, holding something is super uncomfortable. Sort of a 50 centimeters is absolutely the minimum distance that somebody could comfortably kind of view something at, and that's even stretching it. So it's much better for things to be engaged out at the distance, hopefully that Dini wants. And so that's a technical issue, but it has an implication in terms of putting things on surfaces and the sort of the relationship that you kind of establish with things, and the appropriate spaces in which you want to sort of envision things. So if you're sitting in an airplane seat, then you have only barely that minimum focal distance there, and so you would be better off in VR. But yeah, like that's not going to go away for quite a while because of the complexity of adding the sort of the mechanical capabilities to be able to improve that. And my understanding from talking to vision scientists is that that's as good as it gets for people, and that people's sort of physical accommodation capacity only diminishes over time. So I have that to look forward to.
Thank you. Just on the sidebar here, PDF or not, guys, just for the first year, we're going to have to live with PDFs. Let's please not at all go into that, please. It's just not helpful. I want to get, the first presentation I did as a PhD candidate was PDFs are awful. So to talk about the limitations and page things, we just can't do anything about it for now. We will, I hope.
We're not arguing PDFs. What we're asking for is a finer grain understanding of what PDFs mean in this context, because it severely limits our range of motion. Okay, so I think I think what you're saying, the very basic thing that a PDF does in this context is that one should be able to take a PDF, right, from another space into this space, and then once it's in this space, it could be whatever. That's my assumption. I could be wrong, and I'm totally fine with what your assumption is, but we're just asking for definition along those lines.
In terms of this, we've been discussing the notion of augmenting PDFs for a very, very long time. One of the ways of doing it is, of course, with the visual meta approach. And also recently, I've been talking about highlighting things on pages so we can extract them, right? I am not at all saying we should have dead JPEGs of PDFs only in this space. But what we've learned today is that some of it may actually technically have to be kind of like that for quality, and that we have another interaction option. So we all agree that we need to extract more value out of a PDF by making it more semantically intelligent, etc., and so on. And Ken, please.
Okay, yeah, I would just like to jump up to a higher level here because of this conversation and make an analogy that occurs to me, that basically, I very often eat at home. I've got food in my refrigerator. I've got a stove. It's perfectly nourishing. And then every so often, my wife and I go out to a nice restaurant. Like sometimes we'll get on a plane and go to another city to have dinner at an amazing, great restaurant. And wow, that cost a lot more money per ounce of nourishment, didn't it? But yet we do it. So what there is in common between eating at home and eating at a restaurant is that they both involve food. So I would like to point out that everything we're talking about here, I could just pick up a book and I could read it, and that's the food. Or I could put on my futuristic headset and go into a space and there's all this stuff, but the food has to still be there. So whatever we're talking about, we're still talking about a comfortable, high quality reading experience. And then we're building on top of that. There's no restaurant without food. We wouldn't go there. So I think we just, as long as we just sort of agree that that's not even something we should be debating, and we just sort of say, yes, also high quality reading in the best way we could possibly, and then let's move on, because of course we all agree on that.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabian, please, are you going to demo to us, Fabian, or are you waiting?
Yes, I will. So yeah, I'm going to demo to us so that also I think it's helpful when we do both the high level and discussion and philosophical even part and the deep down in the trenches kind of thing. Had a brief discussion also with Adam. Is it really text? So I'll let you judge. He's not there to argue it's not text. So I showed a couple of times last week the little cube, which works, as you can see still. And I think it's really cool. It's $20 more or less, but I kind of suppose I know how it works, but I'm not sure. So I bought this development boards, which cost €7, I think. And it has this little chipset there, the gray one in the middle, which cost about €2. It does about all the, it's like mini processor, very minimalist. And it also does everything wireless, including Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But what you might not know is like this it does Zigbee, which is for IoT devices, which is what allows the light there and like the other sensors and whatnot I have around the house. So that's why I bought this, so that I can explore the Zigbee protocol with the device. And my argument with this, with Adam, is I have the device. I can set it code, of course, and text is code. And then it changed my environment, and not in the headset. Like people around me in their house have the pleasure to get mad at me because things don't behave the way they should. But I also have a description of my house, which is why I would argue. So I'll try the screen sharing part to show you it's my physical house, but there is a description of it too. So let me know if you can see yourselves. And can you see my house? I don't see you, so
I see a control panel. It looks like a control panel.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So if I click on this button, it's going to turn off that light, turn on that light. So if you see the webcam, it's off. And what you can see here on top, the Esprif dev board, that's the little development board I showed you just seconds ago. And I think what's interesting is I have scripts on how to make them do things, a backup, so that if somehow it happened just this morning, I lost the micro SD card of Raspberry Pi, so all the data is gone, but luckily I had a backup. So I can bring this configuration YAML files and the other files in it. So the description of my house with the endpoints, so different APIs so that I can do actions, including from the headset. So I can stop sharing the screen there, connecting also there. So I can, of course, control what this device is going to be able to do. And why I want to show this is because then I can add this pretty much anywhere. Again, this is the expensive version, $7, but the €2 which is like 3 by 2 centimeters, more or less, and I would say maybe 5 grams. I don't know, super light. I can stick it pretty much anywhere. Need to be powered, but doesn't consume a lot. And then I have a thing, and I can get its state. I can write on it, and then I can get an endpoint out of it. So a URL, which I can then control or apply things to, moving my hands in the headset or otherwise. And I thought it's it's an interesting prospect to be able to have endpoints that can be manipulatable in the heads or otherwise of like anything around us. And that's it.
Can you provide a pointer to buying one?
Yes, I'll put that in the chat. And it's also in terms of efforts, I think the SDK is quite well done. So with some basic understanding of what Zigbee is, I would say it was a matter of half an hour. It was not a long-term thing. And then with all those little pins there, you can plug whatever other electronics you might have around, so other sensors, other actuators. One thing I haven't done is I have my little soldering station downstairs, and I have an exhaust fan, and I want to control the exhaust fan like with a little motor to bring it closer or further away. And again, it makes me think of my house as a description, a piece of text, and eventually script attached to it with endpoints. So it's kind of a strange but good kind of way to re-see the world around me.
Twilio was all over this stuff in 2019. You should sell it to their 2019 form. That's a joke. Sorry. That was probably, yeah. Anyway, no, I love the smart home angle, and it's great to see how much more flexible it is than 5 years ago. Yeah.
So just sorry to hijack this a bit, but the whole point of this, in my opinion, so it's of course to have the creative flexibility, and that's why I share it also with the group in terms of what is text and how we can expand. It's a bit much of cognition through it. In this form, it is not HomeKit, it is not Apple Store, it is not whatever. So if somebody tomorrow, let's say Philips Hue decided 3 months ago, I think, that now you had to share data. Also, now there was the potential acquisition of Roomba by Amazon. I have a Roomba in my kitchen. I don't want my data, whatever it is, to go to Amazon. When you use such tools, you rely on such protocols, you get to decide. And I think that's also like the value about it. It's like you don't want a virtual or a smart quote unquote house that actually isn't yours anymore. So that's yes, there is a tinkerability and creativity aspect, which I find it very exciting. But in terms of just your stuff being your stuff, I think it's important.
Yes.
Thank you, Fabien. That makes a lot of sense, and we do need to think about extending into the real world. That's for sure. And my watch just pinged, so that means we're on the hour. Any closing comments for today? I look forward to Wednesday, but the last few sessions have gone way over, which is not fair for those who have to leave and those who have to stay, so to speak. Well, that was simple. Oh yeah, please.
Not that it makes much of a difference because I haven't contributed anything constructive here, but I probably will not be here on the Wednesday. Snapchat is coming to the marketing department, and I want to see what they have to say for themselves.
Great.
Sounds good. All right, hope to see you guys on Monday. And I say hope because I may be flying to see Dini via Rob. If I get flights that are on Monday, I will of course email ahead of time and we'll move it around. Other than that, everything will continue as normal. Thank you all. This is very frustrating in the very good sense of uncovering what we need to do. So thank you very much and have a lovely Tuesday and see most of you on Wednesday. Bye.
Take care.
Great week.